critical piece of information. These text cards claim that not only is Ashley Riot missing after his encounter with Sydney, but he stands accused of killing Duke Bardorba, an event that can only have happened before or after the events that we witnessed. Now, it's quite perplexing that something so major would be hidden away, but things get even more absurd. If you again wait after this cutscene ends, a third sequence will begin, and this one is even more fundamental to the plot, effectively acting as a sister sequence to the game's introduction and containing all manner of important world building. Everything opens with a watercolour style vista, but this time we're looking at the headquarters of the VKP, the Valendian Knights of Peace, a secret police force tasked with protecting the realm from the most deadly of threats. Inside we find a darkened room where three figures discuss the current state of the kingdom, and from their conversation we discover quite a bit about the characters that we've just been introduced to. It seems that Sydney, whose full name is Sydney Losserot, is the leader of a heretical cult called Mullenkamp, and the objective of their raid was to secure the release of imprisoned cultists and force the abdication of Cardinal Batistan, the leader of Valendia's Church of Iocus and an important political figure. It's a story that the VKP don't believe, as their spies have uncovered a connection between Sydney and the Duke, namely that the noble has been secretly funding Mullenkamp, meaning some sort of disagreement or betrayal must have taken place. It's a confusing situation made all the more complex by the involvement of the Crimson Blades, a private militia who directly serve the church, and who we can presume are the knights that we saw at the very start of the game. Their presence at the manor was apparently unsanctioned, and the VKP leadership bemoan Valendia's freedom of religion, which is allowing cults and the church to run roughshod over the state. From this conference, it's clear that Valendia is a deeply divided nation, and while the VKP are ostensibly allied with the country's parliament, they refer to it with scorn and clearly see themselves as the true power holding everything together. Now, while this scene has much more of a traditional JRPG world-building purpose, it's still presented with Matsuno's customary style, and again it wouldn't look out of place.
Why won't you auto-run? I've told you to auto-run so many times, and you stand there! I have done it like 5 times, I'm like, auto-run, auto-run! God damn it, it cost me a death last time, when I showed up on top of a skeleton 5 minutes in, because you wouldn't auto-run. God damn it, see, that's
not just because of what we're told, but because of how they operate. And this
just
will be an
auto-run forward,
damn it, throughout the rest of the game. So with the board set, Ashley Riot, the VKP's foremost risk-breaker, a sort of one-man commando unit that undertakes impossible missions, is finally relayed his orders. He is to head to Duke Bardorba's manor and rendezvous with fellow VKP agent Callo Malose, and then the two are to rescue the hostages, investigate the Crimson Blades, and most importantly, arrest Sydney Losserot. We then cut across to the Duke's manor as Ashley meets with Malose. Very quickly it becomes clear that he is a cold and detached individual, caring nothing for pleasantries, immediately demanding a field report and barely averting his stare from the building that houses his target. Once the manor catches fire, he moves to head inside, and in response to Callo's protest that it's far too dangerous and that they should wait for reinforcements, the risk-breaker looks back and simply replies, "I am the reinforcements." Now you might be wondering why these two sequences were split up, as both are basically mandatory in order to fully understand Vagrant Story's narrative, and as we've just seen, one directly leads into the other. Well, there's never been any confirmation, but personally, I believe it's nothing more than a matter of editing. Would that hyper-engaging opening sequence pack as much punch if you had to sit through 5 minutes of complex world building beforehand? Maybe it wouldn't make a difference, but Matsuno clearly thought otherwise, and by making this additional context optional viewing, he's signalling that this is going to be a tightly paced story, the antithesis of the bloated RPG runtimes that he was desperate to rebel against. The issue is really that it's just so hidden away, and had there been an option on the main menu called something like Mission Briefing, this creative decision might have worked slightly better. Now, immediately after you've watched both of these cutscenes, we're still not quite ready to dive into the meat of the game, as there are a couple more moments of intrigue before we take control of Ashley. Much like how the opening credits were used, these next few scenes are spliced up with excerpts from 2 pieces of in-world text. The first being a quote by the historian A.J. Durai, and the second, snippets from the VKP Greylands incident report. Jurai's writing refers to spiritual philosophy, and how he believes that our bodies are mere vessels for the selfish and vicious souls that they house. It's certainly flavoursome, but even after making this video, I've always struggled to understand how it relates to the plot, beyond establishing that in Valendia, people believe that the body and soul are two separate entities. Now, the Greylands report is more obviously connected, but before we see that, we're introduced to another set of characters and another faction in this grand drama. Resting in his chambers after a serious bout of illness is Duke Bardorba, who miraculously avoided the attack on his home thanks to a stay at his secondary residence. In spite of his sickness, he's being brought up to date by a loyal knight called Jan Rosenkrantz. And through this scene we learn not only that the blonde knight is Guildenstern, leader of the Crimson Blades, but that the Duke and Mullenkamp are in fact connected, as the VKP suspect. Clearly Bardorba is a steely and dominating man, and from his bed he orders his footmen to torch any evidence connecting himself to the cult, and commands Rosenkrantz to hunt down Sydney, telling him that Leomond is yours. His only requirement is that his son Joshua, the child that we saw Hardin and Sydney abducting, is returned unharmed. And for just a moment his stony exterior melts away, and he whispers that the child is his light and his soul. As Rosenkrantz leaves, the camera lingers and focuses on a painting directly opposite the Duke's bed. It is his family, and right in the centre, his beloved son. So with the Duke's faction established, we finally return to Ashley and Merlot's, who have tracked Sydney and Mullenkamp to the ancient city of Leomond, where they discover that its guards have been slaughtered and their quarry has fled into its ruined halls. Through more on-screen excerpts, we learned that Leomond was once a mighty centre of civilization, renowned for its martial strength and religious zeal, but 25 years ago it was brought low by a devastating natural disaster, which rendered the entire city uninhabitable. It is now a necropolis, accessible only by this lone passageway, and considered a death sentence for any who had set foot inside. Merlot claims that the VKP have sent agents there before, but none have ever returned. Right on cue, our attention shifts to the Greylands report, which was clearly written after the events of the game, and it seems that Leomond's reputation is well deserved. The report states that after the attack on the Duke's manor, Ashley Riot pursued Sydney Losserot into the City of the Dead and was never seen again. Our final scene is Ashley doing just this. Regardless of the danger, he intends to head into Leomond, and tells Merlot that she should stay behind, as her inexperience will simply slow him down. All he asks is that she brief him about who or what Sydney actually is, and here we get our first insight into Vagrant Story's enigmatic antagonist. According to Merlot, he's a self-styled apocalyptic prophet, and his heretical teachings have earned him both a legion of cult-like followers and the ire of the church, which is why the Crimson Blades are so keen to arrest him. Similarly, the VKP has been tracking him because of his shadowy connections to Bardorba, although this is less to do with religion and more because the secret police want to wrestle power away from the Duke and increase their own influence over Parliament. The truth of his motivations and allegiances remains a mystery, but Merlot warns Ashley that there is one thing he can be certain of. The leader of Mullenkamp wields dark and strange powers. He can read the hearts of men, compel them to obey his orders, and as we've already witnessed, he seemingly cannot be killed. Ashley remains unconvinced, and having heard enough, he slams the gate of the passageway behind him and leaves Agent Merlot to return to headquarters. Only, as she makes to leave Leomond, she comes face to face with the Dark Prophet himself, and as a smile spreads across Sydney's face, the scene fades to the final few pages of the Greylands report, and Vagrant Story finally begins in earnest. Now, within the context of this video, this all probably seems like a lot to digest and quite a complex way to begin your game. Within just 15 minutes, we're introduced to a large cast of characters, lots of conflicting factions, and a host of locations and concepts which most other games would spend hours gently drip-feeding to the player. Instead, Vagrant Story throws us right into the action, asking us not to stop and ponder every single line of dialogue, but to be swept up in its mysteries, prioritising immersion and immediacy over the slow burn. Matsuno had said that Vagrant Story would be less like a video game and more like a movie thriller, and you've got to say that judging by the game's opening moments, it certainly seems that his team had backed up his extraordinary claims. Whether it's watched on a tiny CRT, a 40-inch widescreen, on a monitor on your desk or from the palm of your hand, the effect is always the same. Much like Ashley Riot, we cannot help but be drawn into the world of Alldayerrydaybaby, and the unparalleled writing and direction are everything to do with why this always works. So with the story established, we finally take control of Ashley in the Alldayerrydaybaby wine cellar, and it's here that Vagrant Story begins to flex its muscles as an actual video game. Now, given the sheer cinematic ambition of the opening cutscenes, you'd be forgiven for expecting gameplay that does the same, either with pulse-pounding action like in Metal Gear Solid or Tomb Raider, or by aping the maximalist RPG systems of Final Fantasy or Parasite Eve. Well, Matsuno opted for neither, and at its core, Vagrant Story is a rather traditional dungeon crawler. Every moment of gameplay takes place inside the walls of Alldayerrydaybaby. We only control Ashley rather than a large party of characters, and there are no towns or NPCs to act as sanctuary from the hordes of beasts and demons that you have to overcome. In this respect, it's somewhat similar to From Software's Kingsfield, or Looking Glass Studios' Ultima Underworld, although here Matsuno and his team present everything from a third-person perspective, which helps maintain the veneer of a Japanese role-playing game. Now obviously this is a major departure from the team's previous projects, and oddly enough, amidst all the interviews and developer testimony, there's virtually no information available to explain this shift in style. All we have to go on is an interview where Matsuno explained that he was particularly sensitive to player feedback, and with each new release he would try to directly address the elements that he felt people hadn't enjoyed. So looking back to Final Fantasy Tactics, we can only presume that there were complaints around not being able to move freely between the world and battle, and having to micromanage multiple characters, which in tandem with Vagrant Story's smaller scale narrative, you can sort of see naturally leading them to a third-person dungeon crawler. Regardless of the reasons for this pivot, it's meant that Vagrant Story is quite the unique experience, taking ideas from all corners of the RPG world and forming something that is extremely distinct from the rest of Squaresoft's catalogue. So how does it all work? Well, you control Ashley in real time, moving him around with the left control pad and rotating the camera with the L2 and R2 buttons, which let you examine Alldayerrydababy's various rooms from all angles. Just like with the character models, Taku Murata's team spent countless hours texturing every environmental polygon, and it means that not only does everything look great from the game's pseudo-isometric perspective, but it allows for a seamless first-person mode without any loss of fidelity. Now this is important not just for the game's sense of immersion, but also for its level design, as Vagrant Story has a surprising amount of verticality. On the square button is a pretty large jump, and throughout your time in Alldayerrydaybaby, you'll find Ashley needing to leap over chasms, pull himself up ledges, and use the first-person mode in order to work out where to go next. That being said, Tomb Raider this is not, and broadly speaking, the many rooms you visit are simple affairs. You open the door, walk in, and engage in life or death combat against a wide variety of Lamondian monsters. This is done by pressing the circle button, which switches Ashley into battle mode and readies whatever weapons or shields you have equipped. Another press of the circle button brings up a wireframe sphere, which acts as your rangefinder and allows you to pick a target to attack. Now this will probably conjure images of another third-person wireframe aiming action RPG, Parasite Eve, but after just a few battles it becomes clear that Aya Brea and Ashley Riot do things pretty differently. While Parasite Eve was built around an ATB system, and battles had you constantly dodging enemy attacks, Vagrant Story is much more focused on complex one-on-one duels. There's nowhere near as much movement, and instead the flow of battle revolves around trying to find the right kind of strike to get inside your opponent's defences and deal heavy damage. When an enemy comes inside your weapon's range, you don't just target them, but one of their body parts, and that gives you a lot to think about, as each target has its own accuracy rating, its own health pool, and debuffs that activate if they are destroyed. For example, if you're facing a powerful spellcaster, even though you have a higher chance of hitting its body, you'll want to target its head, as with just a few strikes you can break it, which prevents it from casting any more spells. Likewise, if you're facing an enemy that moves around a lot, you'll want to target its legs, as breaking them inflicts a 50% movement debuff, and the same applies to every other body part, with the right arm governing attacks, the left arm parries, and the body increasing their risk, which is something I'll explain in just a moment. Interestingly, this all also applies to Ashley, and in the bottom left of the screen is a little graphic that shows the state of his body, with the exact same debuffs being triggered by taking too much damage to the corresponding part. In combination with regular enemies having quite large health pools, this system means you're not just trying to pump out as many attacks as you can, but carefully assessing the situation and picking your strikes to maximise your damage. Now, while this is all very interesting, you'll notice it doesn't equate to a great deal of interactivity, which brings us on to Risk, a unique mechanic that has its roots in a startling narrative development. As Ashley continues into the depths of Leyamond, it becomes quickly evident that all is not well with our Riskbreaker, and he begins to experience visions and hallucinations. In one room, the screen flashes white, and he suddenly finds himself in a lush green meadow under brilliant blue skies. Ahead of him is a single tree, and in its shade rests a family's picnic, where a young boy stands and calls out to him, "Papa." The vision ends, but back in the depths of Leyamond, Ashley can still see the child, with the colour drained from its body, a ghostly apparition which beckons him deeper into the labyrinth. Real or imagined, Ashley decides to follow, and this path leads him into confrontation with the game's first boss, the Minotaur, which is not all that complex, as its head is its weakest location, and by attacking this, you can disable its Giga Rush attack, which renders it somewhat incapable of doing any proper damage. Instead, the interest comes from what happens afterwards, as just as Ashley makes to leave, he is frozen in place by the voice of Sydney Losseron. Somehow the Dark Prophet has magicked himself into the room and appears utterly unthreatened by the Riskbreaker, toying with him and pondering the state of our protagonist's soul. For anyone else it would be a moment of speculation, but Sydney is no mere man, and in another demonstration of his power, he reaches inside of Ashley to read the inner workings of his heart. Here we're returned to that summer vision, and symbolised by his grey model, Ashley looks deeper and realises what he is witnessing. These are his final moments with his family, a wife and son, Tia and Marco. Against this backdrop of smiles and laughter, the scene is shattered as both are killed by bandits, and with his heart pounding in his ears, Ashley is thrown back to Leyamond. Sydney taunts that his inability to protect Tia and Marco was as good as murdering them himself, and when Ashley lashes out, the Prophet reveals that his failure also extends to his work as an agent, as they have captured his comrade, Callo Malose. From across the room, Sydney leaves us with a final vicious goad, telling Ashley to look inside of himself and discover the truth, and to give chase as the hunter does to the heart. With this, he disappears into the shadows, but before Ashley can turn and deal with Carly, his body is racked with pain as another set of memories floods into his mind. Clearly, seeing Tia and Marco has unlocked something deep within him, and this has a direct consequence on the gameplay, as we're told that Ashley has uncovered new battle abilities from within his suppressed memory. This is the chain system, which is how Vagrant Story keeps its combat interesting after you've worked out the optimum location to attack. Basically, you can assign a special move to the square, triangle or circle buttons, and once Ashley lands an attack, you can chain these moves by hitting the corresponding button when an exclamation mark appears over his head. Different moves have different timing windows, and there's actually quite a knack to linking these together, which you'll want to quickly get good at, as there's no limit to how many chains you can execute, which makes them an extremely powerful tool. Obviously there are chain attacks that add additional damage, but many of them are quite a bit more functional, offering heals or weapon repairs or inflicting status ailments, and just like with the targeting, you have to think about which you have assigned and how they relate to each battle you find yourself in. Now, if you get good enough at the timings, there's nothing stopping you from doing a 30-hit combo and killing every single enemy in a single blow, and this is where risk comes into the equation. Under Ashley's health bar is the risk meter, and every chain ability adds a certain amount of risk, which severely weakens Ashley once it reaches certain thresholds. As it builds up, your chance to successfully land attacks decreases, and most importantly, if it hits 100, your defences are cut in half, which in the middle of a boss fight is an almost guaranteed game over. As the bar can only be reduced by using certain items or by exiting combat, it's something you have to be constantly aware of, and it effectively acts as a stamina
At least
bar,
I found it.
punishing players that mindlessly chain attacks and aren't thoughtful about what they're doing and why. Now, there are also chain abilities for when you're on the defense, and these are just as important. Much like your offensive moves, you assign these to the same buttons, and by hitting them just as an enemy attacks, you execute a sort of magical parry that can be set to do all manner of things. You can reflect damage, raise elemental defenses, restore magic, and most importantly, halve incoming physical and magical damage. As Ashley has a relatively small health pool, getting this timing down is absolutely critical, and it'll often be the difference between victory and failure. Between the targeting system and the offensive and defensive chain abilities, you can see how very quickly Vagrant's story becomes a much more involved and complex experience, and this is without even touching on how the magic works. Almost as soon as he arrives in the wine cellar, Ashley overhears the rearguards of the Crimson Blade discussing their mission and the fantastical things they've seen from just a short amount of time within the Dead City. Turns out their mission is not just to apprehend Sydney, but to acquire the Miracles of Alldayerrydaybaby, magical spells that are contained within grimoires. These are ancient books which bestow upon the reader unnatural abilities, and from the conversation between the blades, it's clear that even the lowest squire could draw power from them. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't take long for Ashley to stumble across a few himself, and much like advertised, by using them as you would a healing potion or status cure, he learns the spell they represent and then can use it at any time. It probably sounds like a lot to take in, but over the course of your time in the wine cellar and then the sanctum which follows it, all of these systems and concepts are drip fed to you, slowly layering on top of each other until they become second nature. By the time we arrive at the end of the sanctum and come face to face with a monstrous dragon that's guarding the stairway to the rest of Alldayerrydaybaby, you'll be flying through combat, and it means you can start to appreciate the strategy and tension that this odd battle system creates. Against the Dragon Guardian, positioning is incredibly important, as its weak spots are found on both its neck and tail, but if you're caught in front while trying to get into place, it'll unleash an extremely powerful fire breath attack. On top of this lethal dance, we've by now found a few grimoires, namely the ability to heal and 2 spells that buff Ashley's equipment and lower your opponent's strength. They both make a huge difference to the amount of damage you can do, but are very mana intensive, which means you'll need to land chain attacks in order to refill your MP, but not so many that you push up your risk and can't land a single blow. It's certainly complex, but it makes for a captivating fight, and tickles those brain receptors that love to see damage numbers going up and big monsters being felled. By this point you'll have probably been playing for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and as Ashley opens the pathway up to the surface and sunlight falls across his face, it's easy to think that you're beginning to get the hang of Vagrant story systems. But brother, let me tell you, we haven't seen anything yet. So with the wine cellar and sanctum behind him, Ashley arrives in Alldayerrydaybaby's town centre, and despite the city's reputation, he finds it teeming with life, currently occupied by an exhausted battalion of Crimson Blades. Lurking in the shadows, the Riskbreaker manages to overhear their bit, and learns that the soldiers of the church are taking heavy losses, and are making little progress in their hunt, with the cultists that they manage to capture refusing to give up any information about their prophet. It's here we also learn more about the Crimson Blades leader, Romeo Guildenstern, who, accompanied by his lover Samantha, reveals that the church are far more aware of Alldayerrydaybaby's power than the VKP were aware of. Supposedly, the magical energies that flow through the city are called the Dark, and if you remain in their embrace for too long, you suffer something Guildenstern calls an incomplete death, the separation of your soul and body, and the cause of the shambling horrors which Ashley had fought to get here. Terrified of this idea, Samantha pleads with her lover to protect them from this fate, and in response, Guildenstern tells her that they are here to do just that, as they have orders from the Cardinal to discover the secret of Sydney's immortality. From across the river, Ashley hears everything, but before he can ponder how this connects with his own orders, He's discovered and is attacked by Father Dwayne and his 2 bodyguards. Now, up until this point, Vagrant Story has not really been too challenging. Sure, there's a lot of systems to learn and different combat mechanics to wrap your head around, but it's nothing that a seasoned RPG player will find too confronting. That is, until you face Father Dwayne. When I reached this point, I had my process nicely laid out. I made sure to cast Prostasia on Ashley's equipment, debuffed his bodyguards, and tried to balance putting damage onto them while healing through Dwayne's extremely potent magical spells. The 2 knights fell without much issue, but when I came to strike down their leader, I made a horrible discovery. None of my weapons did any damage. The numbers were the same no matter what I equipped. Somewhat decent chance to hit, but a predicted damage of 0 on every single body part. I was so confused, and with Dwayne pumping out over 100 damage with each spell, I barely had time to think before Ashley slumped to the floor and I hit an unexpected game over. Clearly thinking I'd missed something obvious, I reloaded and charged back into battle, but the outcome was exactly the same. Couldn't do any damage, and it didn't matter what weapons I used, what chains I set, or what spells I cast. Dwayne was impervious to every tool in my arsenal. Well, as it turns out, I didn't understand nearly as much as I thought, and there are a whole host of other systems that we need to discuss if I'm going to paint a full picture of what it's like to play Vagrant Story. At the core of my Dwayne problem is how your weapons work, and there are a lot more to consider than whatever has the highest strength rating. You see, weapons in Vagrant Story are split into 3 different categories. Edged, which relates to swords, daggers and axes. Piercing, which covers rapiers, spears and crossbows, and blunt, which is hammers and maces. The idea is that every single enemy you face is weak to one of these 3 types, and instead of just sticking to whatever you feel comfortable with, you're supposed to maintain a wide arsenal of options that you constantly switch between. Another grimoire you find early on contains the spell Analyze, and whenever you encounter a new foe, you're supposed to assess them, discover which type they're weak to, and then incorporate that information into your battle plan, along with the spells, chains and body part targeting. Now, this isn't too hard to understand when it's laid out in front of you, but thanks to a few other mechanics, the first few areas of Vagrant Story can tempt you away from this process and send you down a dead end. The weapon you begin the game with is an edged sword called the Fandango, and thankfully almost everything in the wine cellar is weak to edged, which means you can slash away without having to do any forward planning. This constant use builds up something called phantom points, which are found in the weapon status screen next to another bar which measures its condition. These PP points have 2 uses. Firstly, they can be cashed in to repair a broken weapon, but more importantly, they act as a damage multiplier, and at 100 out of 100 PP, all weapons do substantially more damage. This means that if you stick exclusively to using the Fandango, it'll become quite the powerful early game weapon, and can more than cover up for any damage loss incurred by not switching weapons to capitalise on enemy type weaknesses. So this is something of a serious trap, as by the time you reach the Leamon town centre, you'll only have one strong weapon, as nothing else you found will have any phantom points. So surely this is the explanation for my issues. Well, surprisingly it isn't, as Dwayne is actually weak to edged weapons, like the Fandango, which means something else must have been causing me to do 0 damage. There is yet another system that we have to bear in mind, and this one might be the most obscure of the lot. On top of enemies being weak to one of 3 weapon classes, they also have an affinity and class rating. Let's start with class, which is effectively the kind of monster you're battling. We've got human, beast, undead, phantom, dragon and evil, and the way it works is that the higher your number, the more damage you do to that type, and the lower, with the scale going into a minus, the less damage you do and the more you take. The same system applies to affinity, which is the elemental school they belong to, with the options being physical, air, earth, water, fire, light and dark. Now this is where things get tricky, because the ratings of your weapons and armour in these classes can change, and for some reason it's all done without the game telling you. Basically, whenever you attack an enemy, your weapon absorbs some of its being. So if you attack a lot of beasts, you'll increase its effectiveness against beasts, or if you attack a lot of fire creatures, you'll improve its affinity with fire. To complicate things further, every class and affinity is in opposition to another, which means if you raise one, you'll be lowering another, once again preventing you from sticking to a single weapon and encouraging you to maintain a spread of options. Now the problem is that all of this is hidden by default, and you have to go into the main menu and turn on an option which alerts you to weapon status changes, which then appear in the bottom left of the screen and allow you to see how your gear is developing. This system is the true issue at the core of our Dwayne problem. You see, the Sanctum is full of undead enemies, which unsurprisingly raise your weapons rating against undead, but they also raise its light affinity. If, like me, you're foolishly sticking to the Fandango because it does the most damage, this will eventually have the effect of tipping its elemental affinity from physical to light. And surprise surprise, Father Dwayne has extremely high defenses against light. So I might have felt like I understood Vagrant's story, but I was actually playing it completely wrong. And when I stepped into battle in the town centre, the weapon I'd been unknowingly developing was completely useless, and everything else had nowhere near enough phantom points to be able to outdamage the Crimson Blade Mage. After making this discovery, I instantly knew that there was only one way forward. I would have to start the game again. Now, I'm sure for many people this would be more than enough reason to turn off for good.
You would not have to turn on. You don't have to start the game over. If this is your experience with Vagrant's story, I don't blame you for giving in to frustration. But the thing is, once you understand all of these systems and learn how Matsuno and his team want you to engage with the gameplay, it transforms the experience into something quite unique. Earlier on I spoke about how, in contrast to most other 90s RPGs, we only control Ashley, but that doesn't mean Vagrant's story avoids party management. And really, it wants you to think of your equipment as your team. In this respect, I think there's a clear evolutionary line between Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant's story. Instead of leveling up a white mage, a knight and an archer, you're leveling up a piercing weapon that's strong against the undead, a beast slayer edged weapon, or an elemental mace. And while the expression within the gameplay might be totally different, it's the very same process of managing a party and making sure they all progress in unity. So finally, with a full picture of how I should be approaching the game, I started over and went back through the Wine Cellar and Sanctum, this time making sure to harvest enough phantom points that each weapon I found could be used effectively in battle. On top of this, I began to craft my party by switching between weapons constantly, and pretty soon I had an edged sword that was strong against humans, an axe that was powerful against beasts, a rapier with a strong dragon rating, a silver dagger to use against the undead, and an all-purpose mace complete with the gem slot. By the time I got back to the town centre and dived into battle against my Crimson Blade nemesis, the difference was astounding, and with the damage finally flowing, I cut him down in seconds. This is the true face of Vagrant's story, a game that, above all else, asks you to be prepared. So with Dwayne defeated and Sydney still nowhere to be found, Ashley plunges deeper into Leia Mond. While our understanding of the game's systems might finally be in place, it's here that things begin to twist, as both the city and narrative unravel beneath our feet. So you might have realised that so far, Vagrant's story has been pretty linear, and for all the cinematic storytelling and complex gameplay systems, the structure of this first section is remarkably traditional. While it's never presented like this, the Wine Cellar, Sanctum and Town Centre are clearly designed to be levels 1, 2 and 3, and more typical dungeon concepts like exploration and navigation don't really come I keep dying, I'm gonna stop.
Now this was obviously
oh damn it, man! Like I don't know, understand how I can go. What am I at now? 12 hours and 30 fucking minutes, and don't get deaths until the last hour from the same exact mobs all night. I'm doing fine, you know, for fucking 11 hours, and then inside of an hour I face 3 deaths for no reason. After 11 hours of smooth sailing. It means 11 hours of it. Boom! 3 deaths in an hour. It makes no sense. It's like, it's the nature of their weird patent, like, signatures and random shit. It's just weird. Whatever. Damn it, I bought Fallout 4 on the wrong thing. I shouldn't have done that. Oh well. that's okay. I think that was only because it was $5. It was like $5. Yeah, I'm gonna stop here. This has been a little frustrating on 11. This is fucking annoying, frankly. Okay. And yep, this is a good place to pause for New World as well. And yep, I'm all docked up and I have money in this station. Yep. Nice. Got all of it in there. It's what, 71 mil worth. Yeah. And what's, oh, and then there's like even more. And then yeah. And then the item hanger, there's even more. Yeah, there's like a lot. Compress, damn it. Whatever. Oh yeah, because I can't see it. Yeah, compress. There we go. And then we'll go item hanger or mining hole. Yeah, yep, there we go. And so yeah, there's another whole load in there too. I'll load some of this in the thing as well. Yeah, 5 more in the thing as well. That's cool. And I'm gonna close EVE Online here. And I'm gonna close New World here. And I'm gonna go to bed, guys. It has been 12 hours and 36 minutes. And I just want to thank you so much for your time. And I love you guys. And I really appreciate what you're doing and supporting me in all this. And so let me just pull my my website. My website is skycat.live. And I'm a full-time rated gamer. All day, every day. Put me on in the background. Click on the cast face to donate, or come to Twitch or YouTube and sub to me, or come and give me a donation at the cast face if you like what you saw here today. This session will be published to my YouTube. It was 12 hours and 40 minutes long, and it'll be published to my YouTube tonight over the next 12 hours. Thank you so much for chilling with me. Tomorrow we'll play some more Rust Zombies and New World and probably all kinds of games. I don't know what all I'm gonna play, and we'll keep waiting for good stuff to come. I was disappointed by Enshrouded. It just didn't have the game. Just couldn't draw me in as deeply as I wanted to go, and it was a good game, but it just didn't suck me in the way I thought it would. And so yeah, and that's all I have for you. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Love you. Bye.